tensions between the U.S. and Iran have continued to increase as Iran experiences widespread protests following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. And now it looks like the Iranian regime is firing back in so many ways. Here to discuss this is our foreign affairs correspondent, Lisa Daftari, who is the editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk. Lisa, thanks so much for being with us again today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Okay, so Lisa, Iranian legislators are now retaliating by chanting death to America, death to Israel. And on Sunday night, Iranian security forces were trapping and shooting at university students who were protesting Amini's death.
Yeah, it's horrific what's been going on for over 2 weeks. Iranians have come out onto the streets all across the country to protest the death of a 22-year-old, as you mentioned, Mahsa Amini, who was arrested by the so-called morality police. They are just entrusted with the task of, stopping women who are showing their hair or not wearing the Islamic headscarf properly. She was taken into custody, and government officials claim that she died of a heart attack when, in fact, eyewitnesses know that she was beaten and suffered head injuries, slipped into a coma, and passed away. Of course, there are protesters who are not just protesting her death, of course, which was the catalyst in this case, but trying to tell the world that this is enough of this government. They've had this regime for 43 years, ever since the toppling of the Shah in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. No freedoms, especially for women. This is called a feminist movement because the women are leading this and taking off their headscarves in public, which again, punishable by at least detention, if not death in the case of Mahsa Amini. Truly telling the world that this government does not match who we are. It's not these are not the freedoms that we want and deserve. And they want the world's support. And on their part, the government is cracking down brutally. This has always been the Achilles heel of this government, is the people. Because imagine, they came into power in 1979 because of a grassroots movement, people coming out onto the street. Of course, they had international help at that time, with many world powers supporting a revolution, and they don't have that at this time. We're hearing silence from the West because the US and European nations are really still hoping for an Iran nuclear deal, which is really absurd when you think about sitting at the table with such a brutal, vicious regime that doesn't afford its citizens human rights, but yet the United States and the European nations want a handshake with them. They want to release billions of dollars to them that they're going to put into, killing their own people and putting into regional terror, like groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and others. So this is what's going on. It's really basic. There's good guys and bad guys involved, and of course, we are here to really amplify the voices of the Iranian people and tell their stories, because they're not allowed to do so. Their internet is shut off. It's punishable by death. They're not allowed on Telegram or WhatsApp or Instagram, places where they tell their stories. And we are trying to tell and be their voices and tell their stories.
And Lisa, you were quoted on Fox News about this particular story. Obviously, you have a lot to say about it. You're very passionate about it, but you're quoted as saying that this regime's campaign to blame other countries for the protests is not surprising at all.
No, it's not, because they always try to find the scapegoat, right? When you think about the MO, the method of operation of this regime going back to 1979, they quickly got involved in the Iran-Iraq war. And that helped them really make this boogeyman out of the West and say, we need to rally around the flag, because we have the big Satan, which is the United States, and the little Satan in our region, which is Israel. And they made this kind of, we need to stick together. We need to support our new government, which is this Islamic regime, because of these bad guys out there. But the Iranian people, they've had 43 years to process this and understand very quickly that the bad guys are actually in their own government. And that's what they're saying. They actually tore down street signs, and the street signs that they tore down, it's very, very telling. One was the Palestinian Avenue, and the other was the Islamic Republic Boulevard, which is very interesting. What they're saying is, you've been telling us lies. We have nothing to do with the Palestinian people. We're not against Israel, and we are not against the West, and we're not for the Islamic Republic. So their calls for freedom are very basic. They want to be wearing what they want, practicing the religion that they want, want, dating whomever they want, and they don't have these basic freedoms.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing the people rise up. And of course, as a result of that, the regime is arresting celebrities and artists now, not to mention foreign nationals. We're also seeing the Iranian soccer team cover up their uniforms at World Cup as a way of protest.
Yeah, truly brave of so many of these Iranians, and many of them have been arrested. And we know that it's quite dangerous to be detained in Iran. It can lead to death. There's no due process. Obviously, there will be trumped up charges, and many of those who have platforms, singers who have 40 million hits on their songs on YouTube and Instagram, their pages have been taken down. They've been detained. Obviously, political opposition leaders and actors, actresses, whomever is using their voice to really campaign for freedom is being rounded up. And for that reason, I think we're seeing more brave Iranians come out. Instead of silencing them, it's really influencing others to be brave, including the soccer players who covered up their jersey because they don't want the Islamic Republic flag to be shown at the World Cup. And they wore black in solidarity with the protesters to say, this is not who we are. We're behind the Iranian people. We don't represent our government, even though we're here in a nationalistic way, right? At the World Cup, everyone wants to show their flag, whether it's Canada or the United States or whichever country you represent. And here are the soccer players saying, we represent the people. We don't stand behind our government. It's truly, these are acts of courage, again, punishable by detention or even worse. And the Iranian people are standing up to tell the world that, we've had enough and cover our story, really tell our story. And I thank you, Jeanette, for bringing attention to this because they've really been very frustrated by the lack of media coverage.
Wow. Okay. Also, Lisa, this is very interesting. So hackers have discovered the police officers responsible for Amini's death. So they've released their names, their birth certificate numbers, their parents' names. So what do you think could result from this exposure of the officers' names? Do you think that people will retaliate against them and their families personally?
It's a great question because really it's almost like, we had that George Floyd moment here in the United States, for example, right? And, it wasn't as though the government or the police department stood behind that crime. They called it a crime and they wanted to investigate and to see what happened. And, obviously there's two sides to every story. There was a criminal and then there was the police activity and then there was an investigation. Again, due process. In Iran, we're not seeing the government separate itself or create any distance between the morality police or the specific officers that were involved in this crime and themselves. So that's why the people, does it really matter who those officers were? They are the government is standing behind this act and they would do it again, just like they're rounding up more women. It's not as if this was a one-off. This was not a one-off. This was not a one-time incident where you can say, well, here's the information about these officers, and now we're all good if justice is carried out against these officers. That's not the case. Since Mahsa Amini's death, many other women protesters, innocent protesters, have either been rounded up, they've been pulled by their hair, they've been beaten on the streets. I put up a video on the foreign desk of one woman with 9 officers beating her on the streets of Iran. And for what? For peacefully protesting. So again, it's not as if this is a one-time incident with Mahsa Amini. There have been many, many Mahsa Aminis after that in the last 2 weeks and in the last 43 years, for that matter. So I think the grievances, and again, there's many catalysts that bring Iranian people out onto the streets in the last 43 years. If you remember, there was the Green Revolution of 2009 that was over a fraudulent election. There have been egg protests. They call them gasoline protests. They call them all kinds of protests. But when the people come out, the slogans are the same: death to the dictator, we don't want this government anymore. So again, the catalyst can be different. And this time, again, the death of a 22-year-old, but the crimes have been the same and they've been consistent for 43 years. And that's what the people are saying. This is not a one-off. We are protesting the entire government.
Wow. Okay, let's turn our attention now to another part of the world. So Lisa, China is operating police stations around the world to monitor Chinese citizens abroad. So what can you tell us about this?
Obviously, they are a police state, both inside the country and outside, the surveillance systems that they have inside China, even within Hong Kong. Now they want to have, political dissidents reported. They want people to be telling on each other. They want to monitor their activities. And of course, now we know that they want to monitor their activities all around the world. China has a very specific way of of inserting itself in all different sectors to have this ability to surveil. So they have, spies within American universities. They have spies within Congress and Senate. They have their spies within different technology sectors where they can have copycat technology and they can take it back to China. And now we know that they are spying on their own citizens, almost like a policing of their citizens. This is the way that they gather information. This is the way that they make sure that they stay in power and they stay strong and that they don't have political opposition grow against them. And they are able to really ascertain a lot of information in different sectors by having this police state mentality all around the world. But the question remains, how are we going to stop them? How are we going to rid their influence and really cut their hands short of having their influences in our part of the world? And that's really the wake-up call here, is to say, how do we get them out of our labs, out of our universities, out of government, and all of the different sectors that they have penetrated and have been able to get information from?
Wow. Okay, Lisa, Venezuela has freed 7 American prisoners in exchange for the release of 2 relatives of President Nicolas Maduro's wife. So what can you tell us about this? I understand they were convicted of drug smuggling in the U.S., right?
Right. These are drug lords that were convicted of smuggling drugs. They are related to Maduro's wife, and that's why they were high profile. And obviously, Venezuela wanted to have this swap to get them out. I don't know if they were ordinary citizens, if they would have the same luck. On the part of the United States, these were 5 Citgo employees that were lured to come to Venezuela for a so-called meeting, and as they wrapped up the meeting, they were detained and they've been held for 5 years. So it's a horrific story. Obviously, it's not an equal exchange by any means, but obviously those are, innocent prisoners that were held. And of course, I think the United States had every incentive to get them out. But on the part of Venezuela, yes, a lot of nepotism there to get them out because they are related to Maduro's wife.
Oh, wow. It's unbelievable that stuff like that is actually happening. Okay, so closer to home then, the University of California, Berkeley has a controversial bylaw made up by a pro-Palestinian group saying that it aims to stop the spread of Zionist beliefs. So on Friday, they created Jewish-free zones, which bans even the school's Jewish dean from speaking. I can't believe this is happening on U.S. soil, Lisa.
On U.S. soil in the year 2020. I mean, it's unbelievable that this is happening in our time, and all that we do to fight segregation. And now on one of the most prestigious universities in the world, let alone the United States, and a state school, by the way, Jeanette. This is not a private school. I mean, not that this should be allowed anywhere, but the fact that it's a state school and taxpayer money goes to this school, for them to create a free zone of any kind, whether it's by race or religion or anything, is mind-boggling. And what's more crazy is that these are supposed to be the most elite and progressive and enlightened institutions in the world, and here they are, moving backwards in terms of who they let on campus, how they control the campus. But I'm not surprised. These pro-Palestinian groups are bullies. I know from personal experience. I was scheduled to speak at Rutgers University, which is my alma mater in New Jersey, in 2018, and I wasn't invited by a fringe organization. I was invited actually by the chancellor of the school to give a speech, ironically, on freedom of speech on campus, and a pro-Palestinian student and group canceled my speech by, again, bullying tactics. They threatened the school, they threatened me, they started a petition spreading lies about, how I will speak about hatred, even though, again, the speech was scheduled by the school, the topic was decided by the school, and it was canceled. And the reason I bring up this example is because this is what they do to control the narrative on college campuses. And it's up to these schools. Again, Rutgers is also a state university, up to the schools to stand up to these bullies and say this is a freedom of speech zone, not an anti-Jewish zone, not an anti-Lisa Daftari zone, not an anti-anyone zone. This is a free school. This is a freedom place where we, again, promote freedom and freedom of speech, freedom of religion and everything else. So it's absurd. And again, I thank you for highlighting this story, because I haven't heard anywhere else. And we have it, of course, at the Foreign Desk. And it's something that we should really be, sounding the alarm on, because, again, crazy that we're talking about this in this day and age.
All right. Well, it looks like we are about out of time now, Lisa, but so great to have you on once again. Appreciate it as always.
Thank you for having me.